Yeah.
Yes, do it.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so while Smart House Club is restarting, I'm gonna get started. All right, so we have only like a week and a half to go until Christmas break. So instead of starting a new like whole unit, we're gonna do a little review and then have a cumulative test
On everything ever.
since the beginning of the year. Yeah.
Sounds like such a party.
So
Those are fun.
Is it
so
like
we have
a
a
cumulative test as in the types of tests that we've already had, or is it like a super long jumbo test?
it's gonna be a 2-day test like we've already had on Delta Math.
Like two versions of one.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
so
don't-
just 2 days in a row, we're gonna take a test on Delta Math.
What?
That
So
sounds
yeah,
like
so
fun.
cumulative test, it's gonna be on Friday, 12/18, and Monday, 12/21. So next Friday and the following Monday. And
I didn't
it's
know
gonna be
what-
cumulative for units 1 through 5, which is just all the tests we've taken so far. Yesterday was the 5th test. And this is not gonna be a popular choice, but no test corrections for this test.
Oh.
I don't think I'm gonna write that part down, and then I'll just do the questions, right?
That's how that works, right?
Yeah.
Well, that makes me sad.
So don't rely on test corrections for this one.
We didn't need correction.
Well, I guess after a certain point, you have to get sick of people getting a 0 and then turning into a 16.
Yeah. All right, so I can share my screen now.
It hurts a little, just a
Are we still
little.
gonna get extra credit?
Extra credit, what do you mean by that?
Like we always do, the
Oh,
review.
no, I don't think so.
When you were just doing this, all this stuff.
And it's gonna count as 2 tests. I know.
You mean,
This looks like a lot of pressure.
Merry Christmas.
There's the 3 strikes, we're out.
if we have any homework over the break, I will cry.
There will be no homework.
Okay, then it's okay.
That makes up for us. Except for the fact that homework grades is like.
I know, right?
All right, so that's the deal. We have a cumulative test next Friday and the following Monday, no test corrections. And so what we're gonna be doing for the next few class days is just reviewing each of the test materials and just talking about that. And the homework assignments for the next week or so are gonna be like review assignments. So they look rather long if you look at it in Delta Math, but they're not that long.
It's like
one
one
question
question,
a each. Yeah, so they go pretty quickly. So today we're gonna talk about
They
unit
go pretty
1
quickly
review.
if you know how to do the topic set.
What's that?
They go pretty quickly if you know how to do the topic. They
That's
devise.
true, that's true.
I think the last day, or two.
Okay, so today we're just gonna talk about unit 1. The first test, which was like September 23rd, a long time ago. Okay, so we started by talking about sets of real numbers. Yeah, so remember there's 3 representations of sets of real numbers. There is the number line way of writing it.
You got the interval.
So like, for example, I might be talking about like a disjoint set of numbers, like from -2 to 0, something like that. And then in addition to like from 1 to infinity. So something like this. So that would be like the number line way of writing it. Then we did like an inequality way of writing it. So if I had the same set of numbers and I wanted to write it as an inequality, I just write 2 inequalities. Like the first one would be -2 is less than or equal to x is less than 0. Or x is greater than or equal to 1. The reason why I write or is because if x is in this set, then it's either in this set or it's in this set,
Can't be good.
right? Yeah. And then the third way of doing it is interval notation.
That's true.
And that's where we use like round brackets and square brackets. So this would be like square bracket, -2, 0, round bracket. Remember, round bracket means that point is not included. And or is symbolized by like this, like kind of like a U a little bit. And then square bracket 1 to positive infinity. And you always put round bracket around infinity. You guys remember this stuff kind of?
Yeah, I remember this.
So they'll give you one of the three and you have to do the other two. That's what that assignment was on Delta Math. They give you one of these and you got to do the other two for the same set of numbers. And then we also did intersection of intervals. Intersection of intervals, which is, remember, that's just like, what do the intervals have in common? Intersection of intervals. So if they said something like the interval from -4 to 2, intersection, like this upside down union symbol, intersection of 0, 5, then the question is, what do these two intervals have in common? Where do they overlap? And the answer would be, it overlaps from 0 to 2, right? The 0 is included in both sets. The 2 is not included in both sets. It's included in this one, but not in that one. So this would be the numbers that it's overlapping on. You kind of remember doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's easier for you, change these into number lines, because then it's really clear like where the lines intersect, where they overlap. So if I go from -4 to 2, then from 0 to 5, like the first set of numbers would be like this line segment, right? And the second set of numbers would be like this line segment. And then it's really clear like where they overlap. Okay? The next thing we did is complex numbers in that first test. So that included adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing complex numbers. So remember, you just like add and subtract just like as if they were binomials. Like if I had something like 2 plus 3i minus 8 minus I, you just treat them like binomials, like I is a variable. It's not really a variable, but you treat it like that. So this would be like, you'd have to distribute the negative sign, 2 plus 3i minus 8 plus I, and then just combine the non-i's and the i's. So this would be the difference of those two complex numbers. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Multiplying, again, you just like FOIL, just use FOIL. And dividing is a little bit different. Like if I had a division problem, like suppose it was something like 2 plus I divided by 3 minus I. Remember, this is, you have to multiply the top and bottom by the conjugate of the bottom. Remember that? So you have to multiply by 3 plus I on top and bottom.
Remember getting it wrong?
And then you just have to FOIL the top and bottom. So if I FOIL the top here, I get 6 plus 2i plus 3i plus I squared. And if I FOIL the bottom, I get 9 plus 3i minus 3i minus I squared. And that's the key. When you multiply a binomial by its conjugate, the inside and outside terms are always going to cancel, which gets rid of the I in the bottom, which is what we want to do. And then remember powers of I squared is equal to -1, and negative I squared is equal to positive 1. So this top part of the fraction is going to be 5 plus 5i, and the bottom part of the fraction is 10. And then you could actually simplify this more because there's a common factor between all of these numbers. This simplifies to be 1 plus I over 2. That would be like the simplest form. You kind of remember that? Anybody want me to say more about that? Are you good? We also talked about square roots of complex numbers, that's not gonna be on the cumulative test. Remember, that's a really long process, and it was like a page to do one problem. Right?
I remember that.
Yeah. So the next thing we start talking about is just equations of lines. So there were two different equations we learned. We talked about the slope-intercept formula. Which is just y equals mx plus b. And the point slope formula. Which is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And so if they give you, for example, like 2 points, suppose they give you 2 points, 9, 8, and 6, 3. If they said find the equation of the line that passes through those 2 points, well, regardless of which formula you're going to use, you have to know the slope, right? So that's the first thing you would do, is find the slope of this line. It's required for whichever formula you're going to pick. So slope of the line would be 8 minus 3 over 9 minus 6. This would be 5/3. And then you just pick whichever point you want to do the point slope formula, or you could do it like trying to figure out what b is by using one of the points, but I'm going to use the point slope formula. So I'm going to pick 6, 3 because it's smaller numbers, but you could pick 9, 8, and it doesn't matter if you need the same answer. This would be y minus 3 equals 5/3 times x minus 6. And pay attention to what delta math says. It might say, leave your answer in slope-intercept form, which it did in some of those problem sets, and that's your answer. That's all you would do. Just leave it just like that. If they said solve for y or put it into slope-intercept form, did I say it wrong just a second ago? Oh, sorry. They might say leave your answer in point slope formula, which would be this. Okay. If they said put your answer in slope-intercept form, that means solve for y. So you'd have to distribute the x, or the 5/3, I mean. So this would be 5/3 x minus 30/3, which is 10. And then add 3 to both sides. So y equals 5/3 x minus 7. So be careful on delta math. Sometimes they might want you to leave your answer like this, and sometimes they might want a simplified answer like that. You gotta pay attention to what they're saying. Okay, then we did parallel and perpendicular lines. So remember, the relationship is parallel lines have same slope, and perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes. Okay? Any questions on that? Then we did quadratic equations. And we solved these basically in 4 ways. By factoring, by the quadratic formula, extracting square roots, and completing the square. should be familiar with each of those. You want me to do any one of these? I'd be happy to.
Could you do extracting square root?
Sure, extracting square roots would be like if you have, it's like the last part of completing the square. If you have an expression that's like x plus 1 squared minus 18 equals 0, or something like that, you would write this as x plus 1 squared equals 18, and then square root. X plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 18. So x equals -1 plus or minus the square root of 18. And then simplify, -1 plus or minus, this is 3 radical 2. So that would be like your final simplified answer. The alternative to doing it this way would be like FOILing that out, putting it in standard form, and doing the quadratic formula, which would be more work. So this is just a less work way of doing it. But it's really important, in order to do it this way, you can't have like an isolated x term, right? Like if I have a quadratic that's in standard form and there's an x term, you can't do this method really. It only works if it's something squared and then a constant that's there. Otherwise it won't work. Does that make sense? Do you want me to do any other ones? Okay. And then after that, we did quadratic inequalities. So I'll do one of these. Like for example, if I had something like, let's say it was something like 2x squared plus 5x is less than or equal to 12. The steps are, you put it in standard form, 2x squared plus 5x minus 12 is less than or equal to 0. Then you pretend like it's an equality. Like pretend like this is 2x squared plus 5x minus 12 equals 0. And you solve it. So I'm going to solve this by factoring. I'm just going to remind you of the little factoring method that I showed you, which is you divide by 2, and you multiply by 2, and then you write this as x squared plus 5x minus 24. Factor that like normal, which would be x plus 8, x minus 3. And then you just divide and multiply by 2 again. Kind of remember that method that I showed you? So then x ends up being -4 and 3/2. Right? So if these are the solutions, if that quadratic equals 0, then you draw a little sketch of the parabola. So this parabola looks like this. It opens upward. I know it opens upward because it has a positive leading coefficient. This x-intercept is -4, and this x-intercept is 3/2. So then you just sort of analyze what the inequality is. This is saying, where is this less than 0? By this, I mean the y value. Where is the y value less than or equal to 0? It's less than or equal to 0 on this interval of x values right here. So the answer would be, this inequality is true from -4 to 3/2. If it was the exact same inequality, but this was greater than 0, then you'd include this, like x is less than -4, and you'd include x is greater than 3/2. Does that make sense? So you put it in standard form, solve like you would normally solve the quadratic equation, draw a little parabola that corresponds to that quadratic, and then figure out when it's above or below or on the x-axis, depending on whether this is greater than or less than or greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. Okay? So that's quadratic inequalities. Everybody good with that? You want me to do another one? Okay. And then the last thing we talked about was quadratic linear pairs, or systems of equations. So this is where you have a system of equations. One is a parabola and one corresponds to a line. Like for example, if I had y equals x squared plus 11x plus 27. And the other one is x plus y equals -8 or something. And the goal is just solve this system of equations by using substitution. Like in this case, I could just take this whole expression and substitute it in for y in there. And then just solve for x. And then you have to find the corresponding y values. So what you're literally doing is you're taking this parabola and this line and you're finding the point or points where they intersect, if there are any. It's possible you might not get any points of intersection. It's possible you might get one point of intersection if this was like tangent to the parabola, or you might get two. Does that all make sense? Okay, so that's it. That's Unit 1. So tonight's homework is just called Unit 1 Review in Delta Math, and it's just one of a few different types of problems. It shouldn't take you that long, but it's good review. If there's a topic that you're particularly weak at, then do more. Like, just because I assign 1 doesn't mean you can't do 4. It's not going to count against you on Delta Math. It's a good way to study, actually. Any questions? Okay. Oh, stop recording.